Welcome to the Inclusion in Sport panel, which is part of Lesbian Visibility Week. It's powered by Diva and Stonewall, so it's super powered, and it's made possible by our fabulous sponsors. So thank you all very much. My name's Dawn Airy, and amongst other things that I do, I am chair for the FA of the Women's Super League and the Women's Championship, and that apparently gives me authority to chair this panel on inclusion in sport. And we're here to talk about the issues around out sportswomen and to discuss what more can be done to improve inclusion in sport. Now, I say in sport, it is a in sport panel, but I suspect we will probably focus a little bit on football because of the great panelists we have and a particular experience and set of focuses that they have on football, although we also have a very celebrated and super athlete who is a weightlifter, a bodybuilder, sorry, I should say, as well. So the panel, and I chair a lot of panels, but sometimes you get a panel together and you just think, wow. And this is a super stellar panel. These are women who have been trailblazers. I'm going to come out with a load of cliches, but they're true. They're trailblazers. They've broken through glass ceilings. They've been incredibly authentic in what they've done, and they've achieved extraordinary things, and they're all leaders in their field. And I'm really looking forward to their contributions and their perspectives, both personal and professional, on the two issues that we're going to debate this afternoon. Now, I'm not really going to introduce the panelists because I think it's best that they introduce themselves, but we have four, like I said, fantastic ladies. Amazon Latif, who is a speaker, advocate, athlete, and a true cultural challenger. We've got Anita Asante, professional footballer, capped more times than I can recall for England. We've got Chris Purvis, who's a strategy consultant, a Spurs fan, and let's be honest, you're a football guru. And then we have Sam Adams, who's a life coach and a Team GB coach, and really takes people who are good and makes them great. So super special ladies. We're all out. We're all lesbians. Really important part, a panel full of lesbians for Lesbian Visibility Week. We would expect no less. But I'm going to go round to each of you and ask you to introduce yourself, to talk a little bit about what you've achieved and just give us a little flavour of who you are. So if I may, I'm going to kick off with Amazon, if you would like to share a little bit about yourself. Thank you.
Sure. My name is Amazon Letty, and my pronouns are she and her. I'm a former competitive bodybuilder, and I'm actually now training to compete in competitive shooting. I'm the global ambassador for 6 organizations, including the Federation of Gay Games, Stonewall UK, Athlete Ally, Copenhagen 2021, Pride House, Commonwealth Games, and Vietnam Relief Services. You know, I speak to governments, business leaders, organizations, particularly sports organizations all around the world in terms of how you can look through the lens of sports to champion equality, and particularly the challenges and barriers that Asian LGBTQ athletes face in sports, particularly getting to pro level. You know, my background in sports, I was bullied continuously as a child because of being Asian, because I was from the LGBTQ community. So I know exactly, you know, this is a lived experience for me in terms of being, you know, the only Asian athlete in sports. In my young adult years, I was homeless for a number of years, in and out of different shelters. So I truly understand what it feels like to be on the margins of society. And this whole journey that I've had throughout my life has taken me to the global sports equality and LGBTQ advocacy work that I do today.
Thank you, Amazon. Extraordinary story, and I know we'll drill in a little bit more and draw on your experience. Thank you. Anita.
Hi, my name is Anita Asante. My pronouns are she and her. I currently play for Aston Villa Women. I've been in the game a very, very long time, so I've also played across Arsenal and Chelsea and various clubs in the USA and Sweden. I have around 70 plus caps for England as well, and have also been part of the Olympic GB team. And, you know, I'm very honored to be part of the panel today to just talk about my experiences within the game and being an out lesbian sports person, and my journey and the challenges. And also, you know, I talk a lot about visibility and being one of the very few players from West African and Black heritage in the game, just, you know, trying to push the boundaries all the time and trying to challenge the sport to be more inclusive and how we can push for that, basically. I'm also an ambassador for Amnesty International and Show Racism the Red Card. And that's a little me.
Thank you, Anita. A great body of work that you've done with your life to date. You're not very old at all. If I go next to Chris.
Sure. Hi, everyone. I'm Chris Powros. My pronouns are she, her. As Dawn mentioned earlier, I'm a sort of a strategy, leadership and business consultant by day or some days, and as activist and campaigner the rest of the time. I'm a co-founder and co-chair of the Proud Lily Whites, which is the official Tottenham Hotspur LGBTQ+ supporters association. I'm also a trustee of Kick It Out, which is football's anti-discrimination and inclusion organisation. I'm on the board of the Football Supporters Association. I'm on the FA's Inclusion Advisory Board. And I'm also a trustee of an LGBTQ+ education charity called Just Like Us, and a non-executive director of an organisation called Leaders Unlocked, which is all about giving young people a voice in public policy. So I guess I kind of grew up in quite a restrictive household in terms of gender norms, first generation immigrant. So, you know, that classic thing of parents both wanting to, you know, sort of integrate into a new culture, but also keep their own sort of cultural identity. And my sense of what being a girl was felt difficult for me, because I wanted to do things that were not necessarily things that girls wanted to do, like play and be involved in football. And it's often those gender norms that restrict us. I think I'm a campaigner by heart. As I say, I've been doing, you know, work-wise, it's been business for 25 years. But if I think back to, I think I was 13, it was a very cold winter. And girls weren't allowed to wear trousers at my school. And we thought, actually, that's not fair. So we did a big campaign for girls to wear trousers. And I'm very pleased to say in that North London Comprehensive, some point in the late 80s, girls were allowed to wear trousers within 2 weeks of that campaign. And they still can, thankfully. So we started the Proud Lily Whites because, you know, if you think about football and how much it means to us all in terms of our being our national game, and often as children, how it's how we learn how to work, play, celebrate together, and how much joy and sort of sense of community and connectedness that I get from it. I don't want to deny that to anybody. And when I think about some people from the LGBTQ+ community of like feeling that football isn't for them. So I've got loads of sort of anecdata, if you like, of people who fall out of love with football in their late teens or early 20s when they came out. And I'm really, really pleased to say that some of the stories of people coming back to football because of the Proud Lily Whites and other LGBTQ+ fan groups. And it really matters to me because we've brought people back to the game, and I'm really proud of that. And the only other thing is that I'm a firm believer, and was one of the reasons why I do the stuff. I listed a load of things at the beginning there, but homophobia very rarely travels alone. It's often like with its mates, racism, sexism, ableism, transphobia. And that's why all of our practice has got to be intersectional. We've got to look at all of those things, because there's no point in one thing, dealing with one thing and not the other. So like Anita, I'm really, really pleased to be here today and really looking forward to the conversation.
Great. Thank you, Chris. And so many issues there that hopefully we'll get time to delve into in a moment. Sam, if you could introduce yourself, please. You're on mute. Sam, you're on mute.
Can you hear me?
We can. We can.
Sorry,
now.
apologies. Yeah, I feel very honoured to be on this panel. You guys are simply awesome. So yeah, I don't have a string of bits and bobs after my name, but I am super passionate about sport, and I guess that's the main reason I'm here. I'm Sam Adams. My pronouns are she and her. I'm known as the real life coach. I work in the sport and industry. I coach from a life perspective, athletes from Team GB, international footballers, coaches, so anyone in the sports profession, and I help those individuals become more authentic, live more expansively, which enhances themselves off the pitch and on the pitch. And I'm really passionate about that because that's something I struggled with and went through myself. I'm a keen podcaster. I've got a couple of podcasts, and I have a couple of other businesses outside of life coaching. I have a property business and a speaking business. But I am really, really passionate about sport. It saved my life, I guess, and that's probably why I'm passionate about it. Growing up where I grew up in a predominantly white community. We were the only black kids in school, and I didn't do well academically, but sport really was the place that I could go to get through, I guess, release some of the stresses and strains of life. So it means a lot to me. I'm super passionate about it, but I really am passionate about just raising the visibility of women in sport and having more inclusion in sport. So yeah, that's just a little bit about me. Thank you so much for having me here. I do feel really honoured to be on this panel. I'm not going to lie.
Thank you, Sam. Well, thank you all. So, when I think about women and women in sport in general, it strikes me, and this is an open debate as a question for everybody, that actually women's sport is slightly better at representing diversity than many professions, and football is, I mean, there are far more at women than there are in the men's game, and I'd just be curious in your experience, your observations, whether the sports that you've been involved in, obviously, Amazon, you haven't been, it's not football, but in the other sports that you've experienced, whether or not that holds true, that actually sport for women is more representative of diversity, or not. Do you have horror stories that are to the contrary to that? Anybody want to?
I will go first. You know, I feel football is a very unique sport in terms of its openness and diversity, particularly of LGBTQ women. As someone who's obviously worked across different sports and worked in the weightlifting and powerlifting and bodybuilding sector, absolutely not. I mean, when I started bodybuilding many years ago, and even now, you know, it has been particularly one of the many sports that's very heterosexual, very masculine, very misogynistic, somewhat sexist, has very stiff gender norms. And I never felt that I could ever come out in sports. And I think that, you know, there are many sports that we have to still do so much more work. You know, bodybuilding is one of the kind of the weightlifting is one of the last frontiers because of this very strict gender norms, that they still have issues with women that have muscles, let alone being openly LGBTQ. And when I competed, I never thought I could ever be openly out in sports. I just did not see it as an option. And kind of now looking back and having left that sport, I'm very saddened that I was never able to come out in sports. And I think we really need to look at, you know, what is football doing where they've cultivated this inclusivity in sports, and how can we replicate this, and what kind of work do we need to do in other sports so we can get there as well.
Thank you. Can I just as a follow-up, because I'm sure people listening to this will be very curious. So you didn't come out when you were being a professional body weights athlete, but you did subsequently. What was the point at which you decided, actually, I'm sufficiently comfortable to reveal my true self?
I think for me it was a journey of the sadness that I had through being a professional athlete and not fully being able to be myself, and always having to hide bits of myself. And then once I left weight training, it just felt like some weight lifted off my shoulder, because I thought I just can't go through life having to continually hide myself, because it was such a strain on my mental health. And I know now with, you know, the training that I'm doing in shooting, you know, it's not a very diverse sport, and it's not a very, you know, I don't know any openly out shooters either in competitive shooting. But I know that now who I am, I have to continually show up as myself, because I'm doing myself a disservice by hiding who I am. And, you know, I don't want that weight to be so heavy on my shoulders, because I can't be my full self, and I can't bring myself to the game and do the best at the game if I'm continually hiding bits of myself.
I think it's
just
interesting. I think it's
me
interesting.
or everybody, but the line is, are we back? Are we all back? Are we frozen?
No, we're here.
Good. Probably my end then. Thank you, Amazon. Can I just sort of pick up and throw it to Sam? Because what's interesting about Amazon's experience that she shared there was the sort of building up to the confidence of being oneself. And we're here to talk about issues for our sports women, and actually confidence is clearly a part of it. Can I ask you, Sam, how do you work with your clients to make them feel comfortable so they can be who they are?
Yeah, that's a great question. Thank you, Dawn. And I think really predominantly clients come to me when they're at that point where they, and I don't just work with LGBTQ athletes, by the way, but people generally come to me when they are feeling that sense of loss of identity of who they are. And sometimes that is around sexuality. And, Amazon makes a really great point about, getting that weight off of your shoulders, whatever it is. And when we show up in the world as who with this facade, as it were, this fakeness, it's a weight. And when you can tap into who you really are and release that, then you have every opportunity in the world to be your best self. And that, people come to me because they want to do better, they want to feel better. But ultimately, when you can let go of some of that and be who you really are, your authentic self, and I know it's the most overused word in the world, but it's so true. When you can let go of that and de-shackle yourself, then for athletes and the athletes that I work from, the natural byproduct of that is they perform better. And their performance goes up, their potential becomes unlocked. So I really deal with people that are kind of ready to kind of tackle that head on. And the first part of that really for them is taking responsibility and starting to be 100% honest with yourself. And it all starts there. And we start to do and have conversations around that brutal honesty with yourself and taking responsibility for where you are and how you show up in the world. And then we go on from there. Thank you.
Anita, when I was doing some background research, I read a great quote somewhere from your mum, which said, I think it was words to the effect of, be afraid to be the same, don't afraid about being different. And it strikes me that you certainly live by that. But I want to come back to the core question that I posed at the beginning, which is, football seems better at most at being inclusive of the LGBTQ family. I mean, have you have been a role model, a pioneer? Have you found that? What are the things that you think football does really well, and what are maybe the horror stories that you've experienced, if indeed you have, and hopefully you haven't?
Yeah, no. Thanks for the question, Dawn. I think for me, I've come into I've been in the game a long time, from the point of when it was amateur through to now the professionalization of the game. And those earlier days, I think women and girls, you've already seen against the norm. Playing sport is always seen as a space for men. Men feel they have ownership over that, area. So you're already coming into it almost from marginalized communities, whether that's your race, your sexuality, and all of these things. And that's the thing that bound us and brings us together into this team environment. And I would actually argue the opposite. I would say in those earlier years, you had more diversity across groups because of that, that lens, not necessarily in the game where, it's sort of filtered away from this organicness of different people coming into this collective. Now it's on television, there's interest, you're seeing less of those, in my opinion, types of people from the LGBTQ community that are representative of all types of what women or femininity is or masculinity is. I think you'll see more of a generic picture and idea of what a female athlete in football is, actually, I would argue now. But I would say that the space has largely been inclusive, and that has transferred up until this point. And that's why girls feel that they can be part of the game, because we've made it this space. I would say the pioneers before me have made it this space because they've always fought to gain space, fought to get resources, fought to get the attention, and that's allowed that to sort of breathe within our own idea and identity of what we want the women's game to be, and hopefully what we will keep striving for to make sure that it will maintain the values that has been long established before players like myself showed up.
Thank you. So Chris, sort of really picking and following on from what Anita has just said, is your observation. I mean, you have been an acute observer about the changes and the journey for women's football. Is Anita's experience what you see as a fan that actually might become a little bit less diverse, and what should we do about it as a result?
Well, I think Anita's observation is a very smart one, actually, and I think it's not just from a fan perspective, but I think if you look at grassroots football as well, many moons ago, I ran a women's football team at grassroots. Hackney Marshes on a Sunday, putting the nets up with someone on my shoulders, no joke. I'd have someone on my shoulders as they hook the nets up, and that was a lesbian football team, and I think it was the first out team probably in Europe. Started in the mid-80s. I'm not quite that old, so I wasn't there then. And actually, that was really important at that time because of where sort of societal norms were. But I think Anita's observation is really is as I say, very smart because we're talking about gender norms, and what happens when you play football is that as a girl, you're already it's already, as she said, marginalised. But actually, as we normalise the game, which is great, we mainstream it. It becomes more and more mainstream, and I think it's exciting that we have proper LGBTQ plus inclusion, because it just means that you'll have lesbians, bisexual women, trans women just playing football side by side, both at Hackney Marshes and everywhere else with their heterosexual counterparts. I think what's interesting as well. Well, it's not interesting, actually. The thing that we've got to solve now is in terms of that pathway to professionalism, particularly in urban centres, is how you have more young women of colour able to access the game and, be on those pathways. Because I think that's something that we're sort of seeing in terms of the professional journey, it is more challenging given where all the resources are. So,
yeah, right, please. That's a really interesting question, sort of getting to the heart of it. And that's, the wonderful thing about football is that anybody can play it, but the grassroots game potentially very different to the professional game. So that's sort of when we think about how do we improve inclusion in sport, I think it needs to be done right at the grassroots level. How do we get everyone to feel very, very, very comfortable? And Chris, you sit on a lot of committees, and the FA are very much committed to sort of inclusion and diversity. Do you want to talk about some of the initiatives or some of the further challenges that you see, particularly at grassroots?
Yeah, I think at grassroots, there are all sorts of things. It's like, we've seen the pandemic has been really, challenging for grassroots football. Obviously, it's been challenging because all those tiny little clubs and all the people that run all these brilliant programs have been stretched to their very limits. I mean, I did some work with a brilliant program in Brixton called the St Matthews Project, and thankfully their funding wasn't affected in this time. But all the young people that they work with, going to St Matthews meant that they were going to get a hot meal on the day that they went training, and then suddenly that wasn't there anymore. But they reorganized themselves, and they ended up sort of taking food parcels to the young people, etc. But it's also that sense of community and belonging where you haven't got your football club there, and what do you do when you're not seeing your mates in the same way, you're not going to school, because obviously people weren't at school at that time. So actually making sure that we don't lose the sort of the impact and the input from those grassroots teams, and and we need facilities and space. You hear all sorts of, sort of stories, particularly from grassroots women's teams that are less well established than their male counterparts, of having to only being able to book pitches at 10 o'clock at night because they've been booked for 5 years by X team, and so there's all of that as well about, we particularly in cities, there's little space, and we've sold off all the playing fields. There's all sorts of sort of political reasons from the 1980s and 90s, but the great thing, as you say, Dawn, is that you can literally play football anywhere as long as you've got a football and something that you can make up at goalposts, you can play. And so that's what you want to encourage, because we know what it means for particularly for young girls to be able to use their bodies, whether it's for health benefits, for the social capital and all those kinds of things. So that's what we need to make sure that we can do, particularly for the LGBTQ plus community, because we know, sort of sometimes in terms of mental health, etc., what some of those challenges can be. So at least having football or sport there is really important.
Yeah, well, hopefully there is a big focus on rolling out and investing more money in pitches up and down the country, so girls and boys can have access to decent quality pitches, very, very close to home or school.
And the WSL thing as well. I mean, you know this more than I do, Dawn, but the commitment to make sure that every girl in primary school has access to football. I think it's by 2024, and we're halfway there now. That's exactly the right ambition, and it's really important that is made available. And you've got to give the FA sort of all their props for making that a priority.
Yeah, thank you, Anita. If I could just come back to you around sort of community and the importance of connection to community, particularly in relation to LGBTQI fans. I mean, how important is that to you, the connection to that particular group of fans? And do you think football does enough in terms of connecting with them?
Yeah, thankfully, I can say, it took me a long time personally to come out to people around me, my friends and family. But I always felt that within the team that I played in, that I had the right support and I had the right community of players around me that understood me and just took me for me, and allowed me to sort of find my own confidence, if you like, and self-esteem to take that step. But, it's one of them things where in the women's game, at least, I think that has been largely positive. We do a lot of campaigning and self-awareness things related to the LGBTQ plus community, because we want to let them know that, this is a space for them. This is a game for them. We definitely value them as fans. We want them part of the game, but we also want them, within on the pitch as well, and within the staff community. I think it's not just about on or off the pitch, but it is about the whole football pyramid, and having that, all the levels of the game, whether that be operations to management, is reflective of our society and the communities that these clubs are representative of. So I think, we know there are challenges, but I think it is moving in the right direction. And if the women's game can continue to try to be that leading force in this area and keep, at least putting these discussions on the agenda, it's really going to help put our game in the right position moving forward.
That's a really good point about there's inclusion on the pitch, but what happens on the pitch is only part of the whole sport. The support, the back office, there's an army of people that support the athletes on the pitch. I mean, do you see that there's enough being done there, that there is enough diversity or focus on diversity with all of the support around you?
Yeah, I think it's something that everybody has acknowledged and knows that more can be done. As a player, we can affect it as much as we can. Myself, I try to use my platforms to discuss and show solidarity for a lot of issues and a lot of different people across our society. But at the same time, you know, where those real changes will happen, I believe, is where the power lies. And if, you know, exec powers in terms of the boardroom and management can also, you know, have a conscious mindset to try to be as inclusive as possible when they're coming to recruitment of coaches and staff in general, that will go a long way to changing the landscape for the better within the game. Because all of us, I think, would like to know that there are people, whether that be in the kitchen, in our, you know, canteen, that are representative of our community, because I may not find that support structure within my actual locker room, my actual coaches, but there might be someone within the whole football pyramid that I can relate to, or has a, you know, a shared experience as me that I feel comfortable to do that with. So I think it's really important that, you know, the game as a whole really looks at itself introspectively and goes, you know, are we still running within a system that has lasted, you know, over 100 years, that hasn't evolved with the changing landscape of our communities we represent as well.
Thank you. Amazon, I mean, you said in your opening comments about ability to challenge equality, and you've been involved in sports and are involved in sports that are, I would argue, somewhere behind football. So I wonder what your experience was and what more you think done, whether it's in shooting, whether it's in body conditioning or whatever. What can the community do to support more their people being both their authentic self, and what more should be done at all levels within any of those sports that you're involved in?
Sure. I mean, you know, when I talk about sports and D&I, I also have to speak about, you know, that intersectionality of being Asian and LGBTQ in sports. And, you know, when we look at the professional level, you know, when I look at Team GB, I don't see myself reflected there. And, you know, we have been doing so much work at the professional level, but it really happens at the grassroots level, and that understanding when we're looking at different communities. And if I think specifically with the Asian community in terms of, you know, investing resources, investing the time, understanding that we are immigrants, so there could also be language issues. There are also heavily cultural issues as to the reasons why we came into the country and to the reasons why we're pushed into business and not necessarily sports. So there's education that has to be done within the community and the family units as well. And then, you know, with that conversation that you've had with Anita in terms of, you know, it's just not on the football field, but it's what's the football field in terms of, you know, are we investing resources in terms of hiring coaches that look like us? When a youth that looks like me and also happens to be from the LGBTQ community seems to be, you know, very talented, what kind of support network are we going to give them? That route of going to, you know, the youth academy level, because we've seen it so many times, particularly with Asian athletes, that we're so good, but at the same time, because of behavior and unconscious bias, we might not be chosen at the youth academy level. So we never make it to the professional level. And when we do, we're one of one. And then what does that support network look like there in terms of that education around the teams, the coaches, understanding cultural differences and sensitivities, and also the fan base as well. Many Asian professional athletes can talk about a lifetime of racism getting up to professional level. And then on top of that, if you're LGBTQ, would you really come out and have like a double whammy of homophobia and racism? So there's a lot that we need to do in terms of how we work with different communities and how we support different communities. And we really have to start right down at the grassroots level and really look at that journey from childhood to professional level.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I mean, I think, well, we all know because we all will have been on this call subject to both conscious bias and unconscious bias. And I suppose, you know, one of the key questions is how do you reduce it? Is it purely through education? Should it be through quotas? I don't know if you've got anybody on the panel. Sam, Chris, do you have any particular strong views on unconscious bias and prejudice and how we tackle it head on, head down? And should it in part be through quotas at every level for every role?
Well, I certainly think the first thing for me is I don't like the term unconscious bias, because I think it lets people off the hook. I think we should call it inherent bias, because sometimes it's inherent, actually, and it's because we grow up in structures that are, we grow up in structures that are racist, we grow up in structures that are racist, we grow up in structures that are homophobic. So we all have inherent bias that we're all unpicking all the time, even if we're from those communities, probably. But I think certainly, from what we've all been saying here, is that you do need to make those changes, from the boot room to the boardroom, so all the way through from top to bottom. And because I think I don't like why people are afraid of quotas. So if we look at it, for example, I always laugh about kind of people moaning about quotas in Parliament, right? There are 650 seats in Parliament. Are you telling me there aren't 325 women in the country who are qualified to be MPs? And the same goes for coaches. Are you telling me there aren't the right X amount of black coaches that are more than qualified and capable of being brilliant coaches across our football teams? So I think sometimes in order to build something, what you want to do is you want to build it and then not have to have it anymore. And if what you need to do is have a quota, then that's fine. That's fine, but because we need structural and cultural change. So that's why education is important, why language is important, why all of those other things that we've talked about previously. We need to look at it. It has to be a holistic package, because one of those things isn't going to help. You have to do it all together.
Yeah, really good point. Sam, do you have any further perspective?
No, not really. Just I agree with Chris. I think there's no harm in having the quotas. I really don't. And I know in the past I probably wasn't an advocate for it, but I do see it, and I agree with you. You're telling me we don't have that these qualified women that can do these roles, or people from the black community, the Asian community, and we also obviously need some kind of system and a better way to be encouraging people to come forward for these roles, to get trained for these roles. I don't have the answers. I'm just here as a passionate supporter of it. But that's where it needs to be. It's encouraging people to get the training, to apply for these roles, and that, let's have a quota. Why not? And if you're scared of that quota, I think you need to ask yourself, why are you?
Yeah, I mean, Chris, your point was spot on, and I think it's very easy to sort of obfuscate responsibility by saying, well, we looked for the best person and we couldn't find diverse candidates. Really sorry, you're not looking hard enough, because they're there. You just got to look harder.
Sorry, Dawn. I was with an organisation earlier in the week, and I obviously won't name the organisation, but there was a board of directors, and this is in a sporting environment, and only one of the directors is female. She's a white female, but she's challenged that board of directors, and they're like, well, it's just the right candidate. And she's like, hang on a minute, I could give you 10 candidates right now. And it's challenging. We need more people like her that are going to step up and be allies and go, hang on a minute. No, there are these women there. They are qualified. They can do the roles, rather than just paying it lip service, going, well, we'll have these meetings and we'll talk about it, but you're actually doing nothing about it. And we need the allies. We need people to step up and say, no, come on, challenge it.
Yeah, that's a good point, actually. I mean, we've touched upon it, we've all touched upon it, about the importance of allies. And do you think we use the ally community sufficiently, to raise the inclusion of lesbian, bi, transsexual women in sport? It's an open question for anybody.
I think it's getting better. We haven't really encouraged it. From a personal perspective, it's not something I've encouraged my friends or people that I work with in the past, but I feel like I'm finding my voice whilst using it, and I'm now becoming much more vocal about that and asking for friends and work colleagues to support me on this and say, because I'm not necessarily going to be heard. I'm a black gay woman. I'm not the first to be heard. That's just how it is. But you as my white female friend, you're probably going to be heard way before me. and now I will kind of challenge, work colleagues and friends to speak up and to become an ally and use their voice. So I think, I think that's something that's improving and still needs to be improved.
Mm-hmm. Anita, do you have a perspective on that, and how important have allies been to you and your journey at all, or given you confidence? Or
yeah, well, I think I've always said, I think allyship is super important, and is actually the one thing that will get us further ahead in this journey, because we can't do it alone, and we can't do it in our individual milieus, whether that be race, sexuality, gender. It's going to take all of us really to create the sort of environment that we want to see for the future in particular. But I think it's so important, from a player perspective. I think it's getting more and more challenging in a different way, because, lots of young players and players in general are using social media and things like that to put across messages and translate statements that they support. But there's so much more self-awareness about image and branding and what sponsors want and things like that also, I think, withhold individuals really utilizing their voice in the most powerful way they can sometimes. So that's the challenge, because as an athlete, you're not just representing yourself anymore either. You represent your clubs, your sponsors, the people who represent you. But I always go back to, people being their authentic self. And that was also standing by their values. And myself, I know what challenges it is to be a Black female gay athlete. So that, I don't want anyone else to have the same challenges coming into the game from any other background, or any barriers that they may face. So I think it's important that I step up as much as I can, and if I can be that so to speak, role model within my environment, then hopefully it will translate to the people within my bubble, and that is the young players that will say, oh, you know what, she's stepping up, she's representing us as girls and women, and also all the issues she stands by, and it will just empower them to recognize the power they have as young women as well, to use their voice. And we've talked a lot about football today and during this week, but you've seen with all the challenges in football of late, the power of fans coming together, and I think that's what you can achieve when there is a collective pull to do something.
Yeah, you made lots of really interesting points there, but there's one thing that I just if I can just explore a little bit further, and talked about sort of the competing pressures that you have as an athlete. Women's football has, the visibility is exploding, and in the UK, I think sort of, especially since the World Cup, it's sky high. We've just announced, as you know, the Super League and the Championship League broadcast deal. The game is continually professionalizing, and there's more money coming into the game. With that, is there a potential set of issues around actually maybe you do need to conform a little bit more, whatever conformity is, and you lose a little bit of that authenticity because the commercial pressures are higher? Do you see that as a challenge, something that you're going to need help or guidance with, or not? And that's a question not just for you, Anita, but actually the whole panel.
Well, can I just interject for a moment? Sorry. Yeah, I look at it as a kind of a watch out, because we're on this pathway, we're on this journey in the women's game to a greater commercialized, a greater, professionalized game where so many new things are happening. And therefore, we're learning about the challenges along the way and how to deal with them, both on a personal level and collectively. But I also think it's about not just, worrying about what sponsors want and all the brands and things like that, but it's also about governing bodies. What are they doing to support and enable us to actually voice, share our opinions and stand up for our values and our issues? If for example, we say we're in this fight for equality, if we make that stand and we might be penalized for it in a tournament or in a game, and now with the Olympic Association announcing they don't want them taking the knee, that's actually reducing that element of bringing an issue to the forefront for the world, and empowers you and athletes utilizing that power to spread that message and put pressure on the governing bodies to make the difference. So if our own governing bodies aren't necessarily in every quarter, and I'm not talking about the FA, I'm talking about it could be in the UEFA or FIFA for the big tournaments, then of course players are going to be aware of these subliminal messages and be like, am I going to do that if I could potentially lose my contract with Adidas or whatever it is, you know? So it all works hand in hand. And I do think that if we can lead from within our football bubble, it will also make our stakeholders go, well, no, actually, we need to get on board. We need to get on board with that. We need to, you know, be representative of those values and support the athletes.
Mm-hmm. Thank you.
Yeah, I think
I
was just going to say, I think values are really important there, because I think particularly like you're saying with the IOC, it's like where are the athletes going to go from there? And particularly in our football, what's interesting is athlete activism. So if you look at the States, and particularly like the US women's national team, their activism is something else. And actually they're making, you know, they're making big changes. And obviously you've got, you know, Colin Kaepernick is like the sort of exemplar of that, but he's, you know, his career is over for his taking a stand. But I think what's important, back to your initial question, Dawn, is that conformity is interesting, because what I want to see is, I want to see women's football keep its own culture and not turn into the men's game. Because if we were designing football, modern football now, we wouldn't design what we see in the men's game. So we've got an opportunity in the women's game to understand that it works within a wider context of the commercials, but to make it the game that we want and to not lose some of that specialness that we've been talking about.
Yeah, for me, that's the classic debate, which is it's retaining its values while still ensuring that there's value, as in money, coming back into the game and back into the owners, and the two should not be in competition. One should lead, value should lead to a better exploitation, in my view, of value. But you're right, the women's game is different to the men's game. Now, I'm conscious of time, and I just wanted to pick up on another thing, if I may, that you mentioned, I think, Chris and Anita, you've mentioned as well, which is about language, and the language that's used on the football pitch and off the football pitch, and how inclusive that is. And do we need to think about some of the language that is used? I think, Chris, you call it the man-on debate, which is a really good shorthand. I mean, I'm really interested in anybody's perspective on that, please.
Well, I want to hear from Anita, really. But at Hackney, back in the day, we always made a point of shouting player on, even though it's two syllables rather than one. Even in the height of a football match, you can still shout player. And I appreciate it's not as fast as the professional game. We will be going a lot slower, but nonetheless, we made a point of it.
Yeah, no, I actually would be so interested to hear what Amazon has to say, obviously, because she talks a lot about being in a sport which was masculine, male dominated, I should say. So, in terms of language, but in terms of football, again, it's come out of the nature of the men's game, and a lot of the traditions and culture that exists within the game have sort of just crossed over and translated into the women's game. And we've continued it, for a long time. And so it's kind of a bit habitual. I think it's hard for a lot of people to change and switch off and try to do this, be more progressive, I guess, when it comes to language. But I do agree with Chris. We had this debate earlier, and I said, well, in the context of a game and playing a game on the pitch, when it's fast paced, I will let girls and women off the hook if they do use man on in the context of the game. But I think once we're off the pitch and we're discussing football, we're having meetings, that are tactical around the team, I do think it's important that our coaches and the staff around us reference us with the pronouns that we're comfortable with, and that they should make an effort to know, actually, first and foremost, what are the pronouns that people want to be referred to, which I don't think is an exercise that happens. In all honesty, that often. I think people still go off what they think is generally a given as the norm when they meet people who might present as a certain gender. But that would be the next step. That's how we evolve, is opening that up on the floor from the beginning. And then it would also lead to us using more positive language, I think, in general, which is maybe more a question for the men's game as well, so that it isn't as misogynistic, isn't in terms of when it references women talking about sport or football, as we see on social media all the time. But yeah, we have to, it starts with us as well, of course. I think if I, take it upon myself and challenge my environment, and we challenge each other, that's how we can really try to evolve the process of language.
Thank you. Amazon, do you want to?
Sure. I mean, I think language is very important in regards to our identities, because we have trans and non-binary people who don't identify within the genders. We need to obviously respect each individual, but also when we think of language, we need to challenge sports media as well, because sports media plays such a major role in terms of how it references women's sports, how it talks about us, the language that it uses as well. And I think, yes, Anita is right, because when we think about men's sports, in terms of some of the slurs that are used, that they use women's slurs as something to, when particularly around our genitals, around hate. And I think language is just so important. And yes, when you're used to saying something a certain way, it takes us, it takes each individual to retrain ourselves in terms of the language that we use on ourselves, but also what does that mean in terms when we use a certain word with someone else. It could, it may be offensive, but as Anita said, it starts with us. And I think if we want to make some kind of change, each individual, we have to make that conscious decision to think about language.
Mm-hmm. Thank you. I'm conscious of time and being respectful of your time, so I'm going to pull this, unfortunately, to a close. I feel as if we've only just started. So I'm going to ask you one question, and if you can keep your answers pithy, I'd be appreciative. And that is the one thing that you would change in sport to make it more inclusive, or the one thing you would like to happen. So I'm going to literally go around the houses. So Anita, the one thing.
Yeah, it's a tough question. The one thing, I think, just Amazon finished on, is the language and the rhetoric used around women and trans women in sport, to be more positive, more inclusive, and to start to move away from something as other, so that we start to recognize all of our contributions as just part of the norm and part of society. Is that short and sweet?
Yeah, thank you. Sam?
Yeah, that's a tough question for a short, succinct answer. I guess when you said it, the first thing to me is about visibility, and I'm always banging on about it. And we know the potential of women in sport is huge, to create this great industry, but we have to have the visibility. And we always hear the saying that if you can see it, you can be it. And it's somehow just increasing that visibility. And if I could change that like that, I wish I had a magic wand, because that really pains me when I see how little women's sport is on our TVs, on the radio, on the back of the papers. That's the one thing. If I could change it tomorrow, I would.
Mm-hmm.
I think Dawn's just done that.
Well, we're trying to, yeah.
Has she? Have I missed something?
No, it's the championship.
Well, sure, but for me in general, overall, all of the sports.
Yeah, 10% of sport is women's sport, and it's ridiculous.
Yeah,
I sense that is changing though. Chris, the one thing.
Before I answer, I just want to say I'm really here for Sam's nails, and I'm sure everyone else has noticed them. But I think let's just have a proper look. Yeah,
they're good.
Very nice, very nice.
On brand.
I'm going to echo what everyone else has just said. It's a really difficult question, and there's no silver bullet, sadly, because if there was, I hope we would have done it. But I think my answer is it has to be holistic. So it has to be from the grassroots to the professional game, and both structural and cultural change.
Mm-hmm. Thank you, Chris. We'll let you get away with that. More than one thing, but we get it holistic. Amazon, you kicked off this panel, so I'm going to let you have the last. You have the first word. Please have the last word. The one thing that you'd like to see.
For me, I want to see more positive narratives and stories around Asian LGBTQ athletes in sports, because always when we're highlighted, particularly in sports media, we're always othered, and our narratives are quite negative towards our stereotypes. And I think that's, for me, this is a really good place to start, amongst everything else that everyone else has said.
Right. Thank you. So I think there's a wide degree of consensus, if I pull that theme through what you've all said, which is we're on a journey. I think, as you said, a number of us have said, if you can't see it, you can't be it. Visibility is really important. Pushing for positive role models, of which, as I said at the outset, all 4 of you are. It's been a really great conversation. I'm sorry it's so short. I think we could have gone all afternoon, but this work, I suspect, that we're all doing, we're on a journey. There's a phenomenal improvements and developments that are happening, but it's never ending. You know, inclusion will never be done. Diversity will never be done. So I just want to thank you all for what you've done, what you will continue to do, and to say to the audience watching, I hope you've enjoyed this debate, and you have enjoyed and will continue to watch other conversations that are being had to support the really important initiative of DIVA and Stonewall, which is Lesbian Visibility Week. So thank you all very, very much indeed.